The morning sun barely touched the cracked asphalt of Henderson County Home for Boys when Danny Reeves noticed something wrong with the motorcycle parked outside the director's office. The kid was 9 years old, small for his age, with dark hair that never stayed combed and eyes that seemed older than they should be. He had learned early that survival meant paying attention to details others missed. The bike belonged to Marcus Kane, a regular volunteer who came every Saturday to teach the older boys basic mechanics. Danny liked Marcus. Unlike most adults who visited the orphanage with their forced smiles and pity-filled eyes, Marcus treated the kids like people. He listened when they talked. He remembered their names. Danny was wiping down the windows as part of his morning chores when he saw it. The brake line on the Harley-Davidson looked different. A thin stream of fluid dripped onto the concrete, forming a small dark puddle. Danny had spent enough time in Marcus's workshop to know that wasn't normal. His stomach tightened with a familiar dread. Inside the orphanage, Marcus sat in Director Patterson's office going over the monthly budget for the workshop program. At 42, Marcus had built a successful motorcycle repair business from nothing. He had grown up in foster care himself, bouncing between homes until he aged out at 18. Now he gave back the only way he knew how, teaching kids that broken things could be fixed, including broken lives. Director Patterson was a thin woman with gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face. She had run Henderson County Home for 15 years with an iron fist wrapped in bureaucratic efficiency. The kids feared her. The staff respected her authority but little else. Danny burst through the office door without knocking. Both adults turned sharply. "Your brake line has been cut," Danny said breathlessly, looking directly at Marcus. "Your motorcycle. Someone messed with it." Director Patterson stood abruptly. "Daniel Reeves, you know better than to interrupt. Get back to your chores immediately." But Marcus was already moving toward the door. The kid looked genuinely scared, and Marcus had learned to trust his instincts. "Show me," he said quietly. They walked outside together, Patterson following with obvious irritation. Danny pointed to the brake line, and Marcus crouched down to examine it. His expression darkened. The cut was clean, deliberate, hidden just enough to not be immediately obvious but positioned to fail catastrophically at high speed. "How did you notice this?" Danny asked Marcus, his voice steady but his mind racing. "I was cleaning the windows," Danny explained. "I saw the fluid. You taught us that brake fluid shouldn't leak like that." Marcus pulled out his phone and called the police. This wasn't an accident. Someone had tried to kill him. Within an hour, Henderson County Sheriff's Department had cordoned off the area. Detective Sarah Chun, a sharp-eyed investigator in her 30s, took statements from everyone present. Marcus explained that he came to the orphanage every Saturday without fail. He always parked in the same spot. Anyone who knew his routine could have anticipated his arrival. "Do you have enemies?" Detective Chun asked. Marcus hesitated. "I run a business. I've fired people. I've refused to work on stolen bikes. But this feels different." Danny sat on the front steps watching the police work. His caseworker, Linda Morrison, sat beside him. She was one of the few staff members who genuinely cared about the kids. "You did a brave thing today, Danny. You might have saved Mr. Kane's life." Danny shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. He was used to being invisible, which is exactly how he preferred it at Henderson County Home. Invisible meant safe. What Danny didn't know was that his simple act of observation had set something in motion that would unravel secrets buried for decades. Detective Chun was thorough. She began pulling surveillance footage from nearby businesses. She started interviewing staff members. She looked into Marcus's background, his business records, his personal life. And she found something that made her blood run cold. Marcus Kane wasn't just a volunteer. 3 months earlier, he had quietly hired a private investigator to look into financial irregularities at Henderson County Home. He suspected someone was embezzling from the children's trust funds, money donated specifically for their education and welfare. He hadn't told anyone yet because he wanted solid evidence before making accusations. Someone at the orphanage knew he was investigating. Someone wanted him dead before he could expose the truth. As the sun climbed higher over Henderson County, Detective Chun made a decision. This case was bigger than a simple attempted murder. This was about protecting children. And if her suspicions were correct, the person who cut those brake lines was just the beginning. She looked at Danny, who was still sitting on the steps, small and quiet and watchful. That kid just became the most important witness in a case that would shake Henderson County to its core. Detective Chun requested that Danny remain available for additional questioning, which meant he stayed in the main building instead of attending Saturday recreation. He sat in a small conference room, the kind reserved for prospective adoptive parents who never seemed interested in the older kids like him. Through the window, Danny watched Marcus talking with the police near his damaged motorcycle. The man looked shaken but grateful. Danny felt a strange warmth in his chest, something he couldn't quite name. Felt like matching. That feeling evaporated when Director Patterson entered the room alone, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded too loud in the silence. "You've caused quite a disruption today, Daniel," she said, her voice cold and controlled, making wild accusations, wasting police resources, drawing unwanted attention to our facility. Danny's hands tightened on the edge of his chair. "I just told Mr. Kane what I saw. The brake line was cut." Patterson moved closer, looming over him. "Children often misinterpret what they see. Perhaps it was normal wear and tear. Perhaps you wanted attention. God knows you've been acting out since your mother abandoned you here 2 years ago." The words hit like physical blows. Danny felt his face flush with shame and anger. "She didn't abandon me. She died." Patterson's smile was thin and cruel. "Is that what you tell yourself? Because the records show she checked herself out of the hospital against medical advice and disappeared. No death certificate, Daniel. Just another addict who chose drugs over her child." Tears burned behind Danny's eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He had learned crying only made things worse at Henderson County home. "I need you to understand something," Patterson continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "This orphanage operates on a very tight budget. Scandals drive away donors. Investigations cost money. If the state decides we're a liability, they close facilities like ours. Then where do children like you go? Foster homes that bounce you around until you age out with nothing?" She placed a hand on Danny's shoulder, her grip just tight enough to hurt. "So when Detective Chun asks you more questions, you're going to tell her you're not sure what you saw. That maybe you were mistaken. That you don't want to cause any more trouble. Do we understand each other?" Danny understood perfectly. He understood that Director Patterson was threatening him. He understood that speaking the truth had consequences. He understood that even here, in a place meant to protect children, power belonged to adults who could wield it like a weapon. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. "Good boy," Patterson said, releasing his shoulder. She walked to the door, then paused. "Your mother didn't love you enough to stay clean, Daniel. Don't make the mistake of thinking strangers will love you more." When she left, Danny sat alone in the conference room, feeling smaller than he had in years. Danny stayed in that conference room for 20 minutes, Patterson's words echoing in his head like poison. But something else was echoing too. Something Marcus had said during one of their workshop sessions. The truth doesn't change just because someone wants you to lie about it. When Detective Chun returned to question him again, Danny made a decision that would change everything. He told her everything. Not just about the brake line, but about Patterson's threats. About how scared he was. About how she had twisted the story of his mother's death to manipulate him into silence. Chen's expression shifted from professional interest to something fiercer. She leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Danny, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Danny nodded, his throat tight. "I'm going to ask you to be brave one more time. I need you to wear a wire when you talk to Director Patterson again. Can you do that for me?" The fear that gripped Danny's chest was overwhelming. But beneath it was something else. Anger. The kind of anger that comes from years of being powerless. From watching adults lie and cheat and hurt kids who had no one to protect them. "Okay," he whispered. 2 hours later, Danny sat in Patterson's office again. A tiny recording device hidden under his shirt. His heart hammered so hard he was sure she could hear it. "I've been thinking about what you said, ma'am," Danny began, his voice shaking only slightly. About not causing trouble. But I need to understand something. Why would someone want to hurt Mr. Kane? Patterson's eyes narrowed. That's not your concern, Daniel. But what if it happens again? What if someone else gets hurt? Danny pressed, following the script Chun had coached him on. Mr. Kane was investigating something, wasn't he? About money? The change in Patterson's demeanor was instantaneous. Her face went pale, then flushed with rage. Who told you that? What have you been saying to people? I just heard things, Danny said quickly. Staff talking. I didn't mean anything by it. Patterson stood abruptly, moving around her desk toward him. You listen to me very carefully. There are things you don't understand. Adult matters. Business matters. Mr. Kane was sticking his nose where it didn't belong. And yes, someone taught him a lesson. These children's trust funds, the donations, they keep this place running. Without that money, you'd all be on the streets. So you did know about the break line, Danny said softly. Patterson froze, realizing what she had just admitted. If you're rooting for Danny right now, hoping he makes it through this, take a moment and subscribe to the channel. Because what happens next will test everything this 9-year-old boy has ever known about courage. The door burst open before Patterson could say another word. Detective Chun entered with 4 uniformed officers behind her. Director Elizabeth Patterson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and embezzlement of funds designated for minor children. Patterson's face contorted with rage as an officer pulled her arms behind her back for handcuffs. You have no proof. This child is a liar. His mother was a junkie who abandoned him. Actually, we have plenty of proof, Chun said calmly. She nodded toward Danny. Thanks to this brave kid, we have your full confession on tape. And our forensic accountants have been going through your records for the past 3 hours. You've stolen over $2 million from these children over the last decade. Danny watched as they led Patterson away, her protests fading down the hallway. His legs felt weak. Chun crouched down to his eye level, gently removing the wire from under his shirt. You did an incredible thing today, Danny. You saved lives. Over the next week, the investigation exploded beyond anything Detective Chun had anticipated. Patterson hadn't acted alone. The maintenance supervisor who actually cut the brake line was arrested within hours. But as forensic accountants dug deeper into the embezzlement scheme, they discovered a network of corruption that stretched far beyond Henderson County home. Marcus Kane's private investigator had compiled a massive file before the brake tampering incident. Working with police, they uncovered 17 different individuals involved in the scheme across multiple states. Social workers who falsified records, accountants who cooked books, lawyers who buried complaints, even 2 judges who had been paid to ignore abuse reports. The media descended on Henderson County like a storm. Danny's face was kept out of the papers due to his age, but everyone at the orphanage knew what he had done. Some kids treated him like a hero. Others avoided him, scared of the changes sweeping through their lives. The state immediately placed Henderson County home under emergency supervision. New staff arrived. Real caseworkers who actually cared. Therapists who specialized in trauma. And donations poured in from across the country once people learned what had been happening to these children. Marcus Kane visited Danny 3 days after Patterson's arrest. They sat together in the workshop, neither quite knowing what to say. I never got to thank you properly, Marcus said finally. You saved my life, kid. Danny shrugged, uncomfortable with the weight of those words. I just saw something wrong and said something. Marcus smiled. That's called integrity, Danny. A lot of adults don't have that. He hesitated, then pulled out a folder. I've been thinking. I'm not married. No kids of my own. I've got a house with 3 bedrooms that's way too empty. What would you think about making that arrangement permanent? Danny's breath caught. You mean foster care? I mean family, Marcus corrected gently. The courthouse smelled like old wood and nervous sweat. Danny sat between Marcus and Linda Morrison, his former caseworker who had become a key witness in the prosecution. The trial had lasted 3 weeks, and today was sentencing day. Judge Harold Martinez looked down from the bench with an expression of barely controlled anger. In 30 years on this bench, I have never seen such a systematic betrayal of vulnerable children. Director Patterson, you were entrusted with their welfare, their futures, their very lives, and you treated them as nothing more than a revenue stream. Elizabeth Patterson stood in an orange jumpsuit, her hair no longer pulled tight, her face gaunt and aged. She stared straight ahead, showing no remorse. The sentences came down like hammer strikes. Patterson received 25 years for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit murder, and child endangerment. The maintenance supervisor got 15 years. The accountants, lawyers, and social workers received sentences ranging from 5 to 12 years. The two judges were disbarred and sentenced to 10 years each. But the number that made Danny's hands shake was different. 170 people. That's how many individuals Detective Chen's expanded investigation had identified as either directly involved in the embezzlement scheme or complicit in covering it up across 7 states. Not all would face criminal charges, but their lives as they knew them were over. Careers destroyed, reputations shattered, families torn apart. 170 people who had wanted Marcus Kane dead, either actively or passively, because he had threatened to expose what they were doing to children like Danny. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Marcus shielded Danny from the cameras, but one question cut through the noise. How does it feel knowing you stopped all those people? Danny paused, looking back at the courthouse. It doesn't feel like winning, he said quietly. It just feels like the truth. The adoption became official 2 months later in a much smaller courtroom. Judge Martinez presided over this hearing too, and his expression was entirely different. Warm, almost tearful. Marcus Kane, do you promise to provide for this child, to protect him, to guide him, and to love him as your own? I do, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Daniel Reeves, do you accept Marcus Kane as your legal guardian and father? Danny looked up at Marcus, at this man who had shown up every Saturday, who had taught him that broken things could be fixed, who had investigated corruption even when it put his life at risk, who had opened his home and his heart. Yes, sir, Danny said. I do. When the gavel came down, Danny felt something he hadn't felt since before his mother died. Safe. Wanted. Home. Linda Morrison hugged them both outside the courtroom, tears streaming down her face. The other kids from Henderson County Home, now distributed among better facilities and foster homes, had sent cards and letters. They called Danny a hero, but Danny didn't feel like a hero. He just felt like a kid who finally had a dad. 5 years later, Danny Kane stood in the garage of Kane Custom Motorcycles, now expanded into a 3-building complex that employed 22 people. At 14, he was too young to work full-time, but weekends and summers found him here, learning the business that would someday be his. Marcus watched his son adjust the carburetor on a vintage Triumph with the kind of precision that came from genuine love of the craft. The kid had grown 6 inches in 5 years. His voice had dropped, and he moved with a confidence that the scared 9-year-old in the orphanage never could have imagined. You're getting better than me, Marcus said, leaning against the workbench. Danny grinned without looking up. You're just getting old, Dad. The word still made Marcus's chest tight with gratitude. Dad. He never got tired of hearing it. The business had grown exponentially after the trial. Marcus had used his newfound notoriety to launch a nonprofit that taught motorcycle mechanics to foster kids and former inmates. Kane's Second Chance Workshop operated out of the 3rd building, providing job training and employment to young people whose society had written off. Danny had become the unofficial ambassador of the program. He spoke at fundraisers, sharing his story with a raw honesty that moved audiences to tears and opened wallets. The scared kid who could barely make eye contact now commanded rooms full of adults. Detective Sarah Chun visited regularly. She had become something like family, attending Danny's basketball games and joining them for Sunday dinners. She brought news of the ongoing legal aftermath. Most of the 170 people involved had been processed through the system. Restitution was being paid to victims. Child protective services across 7 states had been completely reformed. Henderson County Home for Boys had been shut down permanently. The building now housed a community center with a massive plaque in the lobby listing the names of every child who had lived there, a memorial to suffering that would never be forgotten. Danny's mother's case had been solved too. She hadn't abandoned him. She had died of complications from pneumonia in a hospital 3 states away, traveling to try to get into a treatment program. Her body had been misidentified in the chaos of an overwhelmed system. Marcus had made sure she was properly buried, with a headstone that read "Beloved Mother." Danny visited her grave once a month. On this particular Saturday, Danny finished the triumph and walked outside where Marcus was teaching a group of new students. Former foster kids, just like them. Kids who needed to know that broken things could be fixed. One of them, a quiet girl named Rosa, reminded Danny of himself 5 years ago. Same scared eyes, same defensive posture. Danny sat down beside her. "Let me show you something," he said gently. "This is how you check break lines. It might seem small, but paying attention to details like this can save lives." Rosa looked at him with sudden interest, and Danny saw the spark. The same spark Marcus had ignited in him all those years ago. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the end. If it moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment telling us what kind of stories you want to hear next. Real stories about real courage deserve to be told, and your support helps us keep telling them. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that one small act of bravery can change everything. We'll see you in the next one.